Let's get started. Again, that was a much younger version of me. I started working at like 2007. So appearances are deceptive, and so is the photo. So let me quickly go over like my journey so far in like maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then I want to dive a little bit deeper into the meat of the presentation today. Started my career in 2007 working for Microsoft. Started as a software developer, wrote a lot of like C# code. I don't think anybody writes those anymore, but had a lot of experience writing them. And then eventually graduated into engineering management. One of the things that I learned along the way is while graduating from engineering to engineering management, a part of transition in my role was organically thinking about product, and that ended up being the case when I moved to LinkedIn as well, where I was tasked to build a team to work on creating a big data platform for analytics and reporting. The good news is we did not have a product manager on the team, so that forced me to step in as a product manager and think about like how to shape the product, how to position the product, and what are the things we should do, and learned a lot of things along the way. And I think somewhere down the line, I made a call to make sure that, hey, this is something that I want to focus on, and this is one of the things that I would love to kind of do in my career. So transitioned full-time into product when I moved from LinkedIn to Adara. Adara is a company where we focus on ad tech platform for travel companies. So for like a year, I was tasked along with a team of awesome people of engineers to build a next generation bidding platform for travel companies. I was there for a year, and then one of the things I realized is while at Microsoft and at LinkedIn, the thing that excited me was like always thinking about the end consumer. And I think that was missing in my startup at Adara because it was a B2B. So thankfully met founders at Instacart way back in time, and things worked out so far pretty well. So once I started with Instacart, it was very clear that the path of whatever I was taking from engineering to data to product kind of all married in like one shot at Instacart. So without further ado, I want to talk about three things today, and hopefully there are a few key takeaways for everybody in the audience. The first thing I want to talk about is some of the skills that I wish I'd known years in advance when thinking about product and when like transitioning to product. The second is courtesy working on a couple of startups, Instacart and Adara. There are a few things that I've observed as do's and don'ts of introducing product in a startup, because sometimes product is not introduced in a company right in the beginning. Usually things start with like a great product market fit, a bunch of hackers working together on a technology, but at some point in the time it is important to bring in product to a startup. One of the things that again just taking a step back, there is a lot of content that is available today online for what makes a great product manager. You have forums like Product School, you have a lot of materials available online, you have great product management mentors who are helping the team. So my goal is not to like give a summary of those. I would love for the team to take away some of the deep dives that I felt are like important, and I'm going to talk about three of them today within the product management skill context. The first one is what we call hypothesis testing. Taking a step back, at its very core, product management is hypothesis testing, which is it is expected of the product managers to have a worldview of what they are working on. It is expected of them to have a vision. That vision may not be right. That's not the point. The point is to have an opinion and make sure that you are always thinking about like perfecting that opinion. In short, it is expected of the product managers and product leaders to have a vision and try to work backwards from it. So it's important to have that vision, because otherwise you are like navigating towards a goal that you don't know whether it's right or wrong. And also these opinions that is expected of product managers are not like fixed. So don't be too much sentimental about those opinions, and using the power of data, using the power of user research and all of the resources available to a product manager, keep constantly refining those. And I think that's where great product managers differ from like good product managers. So constantly revising those opinions, and we call it like strong opinions loosely held. Just keep making sure that you're refining those opinions. And finally, one of the things that I've observed in like great product managers is not only are you great in like setting up a hypothesis, creating a framework for testing those hypotheses, but every time you do that, you take a step closer towards the vision. So you're not testing 17 disparate things, but you're testing one thing at a time so that it advances you towards the vision that you want to accomplish. You want to make sure that all the learnings that you've had in the past adds up and aggregates towards the next set of things you want to test. So making sure that you're advancing the product one step at a time is like very, very crucial. The next thing that I would love for us to spend some time on is what I call like think big and move small. Indexing of the first slide, once you have a vision, it's great and you're working on some roadmap, you're trying to figure out like, hey, this is the North Star for the company, this is the North Star for the product. But it doesn't do much justice because you're not going to jump to that step in like one go. Yeah, there is going to be a complicated path that everybody has to take, every company, every team, to go from where you are today to where you ought to be. So it is extremely important to break those roadmaps or vision into solvable components. And by solvable components, what I mean is have those components where you're setting some goals. Again, the goals may not be right all the time. It's the point of it is not to be right. The point of it is to have an opinion on how do you break these North Star metrics into components that I can set goals on and motivate and inspire a team of people to go and execute on it. And along the way, one of the core things that at least I've learned is every step in the process is not going to be the same. Sometimes you have to focus on getting a product quicker. Sometimes you have to focus on getting a great quality product out because you don't get many shots at like making it right. And sometimes you have to make sure that while all the bullets are fired in a product, you have to land it in a much more efficient way so that it works at scale. Again, it is a true intuition that product managers have to build over time of like when to compromise what. For example, this is like a typical case. I'm sure like all of you have hired a contractor and said like, hey, I want you to build something fast, cheap, and of high quality. It's not happening. So it's important to make sure that you compromise on a few things, but also you don't compromise on the end goal. So eventually we want to make sure that you are building a product that is working at scale at high quality, and we are focusing on agility and also making sure that it works at efficient, but every step in the way may not have all the bullets in the play. And finally, double clicking on the advancement piece, every step in the process, it is extremely important to make sure that you're learning something from that experiment. The goal of the experimentation is not to succeed at every step, but it's important to make sure that when you're failing, by failing, I don't mean like you're completely wrong. It's like you're expecting A and something A prime happens. But you also want to make sure that you're taking that into account while figuring out the next set of things to do. So it's extremely important to make sure that you're de-risking things sooner, and more importantly, you're actually failing forward. And finally, one of the most touted skill set of a product manager is communication. And I'm sure you've heard 100 speakers before me talk about this, and you're going to hear 100 speakers talk about after me about the importance of communication for a product manager, and that is absolutely true. And there is a reason it's touted that much. So what I want to do today is like give you 4 tips that I felt are like some of the tangible tips that, again, I wish I had known a few years back while perfecting the mastery of communication. Number 1 is layering your message. Let me take a minute to give an understanding of what this is. As product managers, we are supposed to work with different stakeholders. Like there is engineering, design, legal team, sales, business partners. You are the spoke of the wheel that drives the wheel. But every stakeholder does not have the same context, does not have the same input, and does not have the same decision-making power. So while you're communicating, whether it is written communication or you're speaking to them or you're trying to give a talk to them about like the launch strategy, layer your message. Meaning you always start with the vision and then go, what is the level 1 of details that is needed? What is the level 2 of details that is needed? What is the level 3 of details that is needed? Because you want to make sure that whoever are the stakeholders who are at the right level of context get the takeaway at that level. Otherwise, you're going to give too much information to somebody who probably don't need that too much information, or you're not going to give information to somebody who actually need that information. So I think this is a skill set that is more important while you're like writing, but it's also more important while you're like addressing the audience and speaking. Another tip that one of my mentors gave me was like, while you're trying to communicate to an audience, instead of thinking about like what they are going to take away, if you flip it into like what they will use to communicate to the audience of them, indexes the focus of the communication on some key points. Like don't worry about what you're going to communicate, but worry about like if they were to communicate it back to somebody else, what are the things that you have to, what are the things that they have to make sure that they should index on. And I think flipping that first order to second order automatically forces us to communicate only the key things and not give too much of the details. And finally, there is this technique called anchoring. I'm sure like all of you have heard about it, which is while you're trying to communicate whatever the content is, whether it is a product strategy, a product roadmap, try to anchor it around a few key topics, whether it is anchoring to the vision that you're trying to move, anchoring to a milestone, anchoring to a goal, so that again you ease what is needed for the audience to be taken away. Instead of trying to focus on all of the things, try to anchor it on a few things. And finally, one of the things that I've found very, very useful is there is no harm in repeating the message that you have communicated, because we can't expect people to be like attentive all the time. Like everybody has like 17 things to do. So it's important to make sure that whether you're writing or and communicating or emailing, make sure that you're repeating the core content so that it lands every time. And I think sometimes you feel like the second or the third time they start to resonate more than what they resonated in the first time. And again, just to summarize some of the 3 techniques that I think it's more important for a product manager, apart from all the other skill sets, like you need to be strong in data, you need to be strong in experimentation. I truly believe that when starting a product career, think about like how do you test an hypothesis, how do you form an hypothesis, and then how do you break the problem into components that you can verify and test every time. And finally, making sure that you have a strategy for communicating whatever you're working on. The second topic that I would love to cover is courtesy some of the work that I've done at Instacart and before that with Adara. There are a few things that I've noticed as when you're working in a smaller company, and this especially true for like founders, where it is important to ensure that you bring product management into the ecosystem at the right time and at the right setup. Because as I told you, every company is working on a different set of challenges, different stages of the company. So it's very, very crucial to figure out what is the right setup for a product manager. So first, let's ask the question of when does product management actually make sense? The first thing that I found is when founders cannot scale, meaning usually a product manager, there is a part of a product manager in every founder, and that's how they actually go and figure out like, hey, this is my worldview, and I feel like there is a gap in the market for this need, and I'm going to build a company and I'm going to build a product to make sure that we address that need. So founders are the product managers from day one. That is the reality. But at some point in time when the company becomes, I don't know, maybe 15 people or 20 people, and there is enough business coming in, enough revenue coming in, there is a scaling aspect of the founders. So that is one of the indications to make sure that, hey, think about bringing in product management as like a formal vertical. The second thing is, at some point in time along the way, the leverage of the team goes down and the productivity goes down, but they are like constantly busy and working on things. This is another indication that the team and the company is not working on the most important problem, but they are like working all the time. So I think it's important to make sure that you take a pulse of the company and the product team and say like, hey, are you busy productive or actually productive? And the next thing that I think I've found in smaller companies, and this was true even in Instacart in the old days, is there's a lot of disciplines and there is a huge disconnect, meaning sales team is thinking we are doing one, the business development team is thinking we are doing two, engineering team is doing something totally different that the company needs. So there is a huge disconnect, and that adds to a lot of like unhappiness and lack of purpose and things like that. Doesn't mean that suddenly a product manager appears from the cloud and all of these goes away. That's not the case. I think, in fact, in some cases, when a bad product manager comes in, all these becomes worse. So I think it's extremely important to make sure that you identify the when. And I think these are the things that at least I've found as like some indications where you ought to be looking at like, hey, should we consider this a serious vertical? The next thing is like, now let's say you've identified there is a need, like how do you kind of solve it? And again, there is no magic bullet. The first thing that I would look for is usually in successful companies, like one of the founders, maybe a co-founder of the company or an internal early employee, has an ability to kind of scale and become a product manager. And again, this doesn't mean that they suddenly stop working on whatever they're doing. But the key thing here is like they're starting to develop that perspectives that we looked at before as skill sets. So I think usually the sign is to look for those internal people who want to kind of go the extra mile and not just do the work, but trying to kind of say like, hey, how can I scale the business? How can I scale the company? How can I scale the team? And I think one of the things that we did in the early days of Adara Instacart is like, when somebody is interested or when you're looking for a co-founder to be transitioned to a product person, build a 30, 60, 90-day plan. And again, the 30, 60, 90, the numbers doesn't, it's not sentimental. It's more about like, how do you create like a milestone way of looking at what are the outcomes of this change? And I think having a documented roadmap always helps it. Otherwise, usually this person is going to go back to whatever they're already doing, and that doesn't help anybody. So this is more like a disciplined way of looking at it, but nothing very instructive about it. But the key thing while building this 30, 60, 90-day plan is like focus on like one metric. And I think this is the classic mistake that everybody does, where suddenly you drop a product manager into the equation and expect everything to be like organized. And I think that's not the case. And in fact, it's going to set up that person and the company for a failure, because suddenly all the stakes are on one person. So the recommendation is like take one metric and one vertical for the company that the founders think are like very crucial in, let's say, the next 1 or 2 quarters, and create a plan around that, create a roadmap around that, and create like some opinions on, here are the 7 things that we have to do to, at least we believe those 7 things will move the metric. It may not, the experiment will tell otherwise, but at least you are creating that discipline around making that plan happen. And definitely don't have the product manager try to like solve all the problems of the company. It's not going to scale. They will end up diluting themselves, and more importantly, they'll end up being like a project manager. They're trying to kind of manage the milestones, but they're not adding any value in terms of leverage or benefit to the company. And this is one of the key things that some of the companies don't do, which is not only you're bringing that person to help with the leverage, but you have to give them some decision-making power and authority and ownership. Because in the absence of that, they are still looking up to the founders, they are still looking up to whoever was decision-making authority before, and they're not driving the decision. It's not adding efficiency to the process, it's just adding another person to the spoke of the wheel. And this is the hardest thing to do for the founders, because so far they have been the one who have been in the center of all the decision making, but relinquishing and delegating that ownership is like very, very tough. So I think I would watch out for this if you are the product manager of a company who's like pretty small. And finally, it is also expected that something should change. Like the product development process has to go through a little bit of a change, because if you're doing the same thing, you're not adding any efficiency to the process. So it is expected of product managers to put in a little bit of a process. And again, any process you put in place should be self-defendable. It should not be the process for the sake of process. It should be like, hey, can we make sure that start of the week we are figuring out what are the things we should do? Can we make sure that at the start of the quarter we look at all the 3 big bets that we have to work on, so on and so forth. And again, over time, whatever works for the team is the best process. There is no one-size-fits-all tool. Like Jira is not the solution for everything. So there are anything that works for the team is the right process for the team. And over time, some of the things that used to work before will not work, because as company scales, certain things fail, certain things change. And one of the things that I think it's extremely important to make sure is like have an honest conversation within the team on what has changed. Let's say a product manager is there in the team, or a set of product managers have been brought into the company. We expect a change, and I think that is the reason there is a vertical called product management. I would say the first thing is the entire team, and especially the leadership team, should have gotten an increased leverage. If they think that they don't have increased leverage, then something is somewhere wrong, because the whole job of a product manager is quote unquote to be the CEO of the product, but in short it's more around taking ownership of the product metrics, product development, and then trying to make it better and better. So if there is no increased leverage, then something is wrong. The second thing again is like very crucial, which is there should be either leading indicators of some business KPIs improving, or some KPI should have already improved, if not at least the leading indicators. Because again, the goal is to make sure that you bring in this vertical to improve the impact on the business and the company. So it cannot be like, hey, everybody is feeling better because there is now an Excel sheet of like tracking all the things. That's not the goal. The goal is like, of course, that's part of the process, but some meaningful metric should have moved maybe in a quarter or 2, or at least there should be indications of that. And finally, everybody should be aligned on like the sense of purpose, meaning the engineering team, the sales team, whoever are the stakeholders should know the directionality in which we are going. And this is a very, very crucial responsibility of a product manager. It is extremely important to make sure that you spend time in communication, but also like constantly going back to like, why are we doing this? Why are we not doing 3 other things that everybody thinks we should do, but this is the most important thing we should do. And finally, as a smoke test, a product manager should exit out of this, let's call onboarding process, with a high-level roadmap. And again, this roadmap may not be the real roadmap for the company, but I think having a sense of like, hey, this is what we should be doing in the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. And of course, that constantly changes with the market condition changes, the company priority changes, suddenly there is a funding and we focus on growth. All of these things are changing, but having a framework of a roadmap is like very, very crucial for a product manager. Let me pause on this slide and like give a summary of like few things, right? Again, think about like when should a product manager be introduced in a startup. Second, how do you kind of onboard them and make them successful, and how they are going to make the company and the a team successful. It's a two-way transaction. So not only that the person succeeds, but the person is making the company and the business succeed. Let me move on to the final topic that I would love to kind of touch upon. So there are a few things that I've learned in my careers and want to kind of share those tips with you folks. And I wish I had known this like few years back, but better late than never. The first thing that I think many people make a mistake is think of PM career as a lot more linear, which is, hey, I'm going to spend some time starting as an APM, building the skill sets, and then year 2, year 3, year 4, I'm going to be a senior PM. I think it's fundamentally wrong to think about product management in a very linear career, because by definition, the role scales with leverage and it doesn't scale with time or impact. So one of the things I would love for people to think about, especially the ones who are starting their careers, is think about how much time do you spend in the basics, how much time you spend about like building your expertise in hypotheses, expertise in communication, expertise in forming those opinions. And it's okay to spend enough time before like kind of starting on the engine on the career path. So would love for people to spend more time on the basics. And again, one of the tips that at least work for me is like you try to do the job for free. Like try to see if you can help a product manager in your existing company or a founder who is struggling to scale, and see if you can kind of peel a portion of the problem and like take on the problem and solve it. So I think that is something that I would recommend everybody do, and do it in a scale that makes sense for you folks. And finally, figure out how to scale with leverage, because one of the main differences between, let's say, an engineering role or a sales role or a BD role versus product is by definition the deliverable is not directly coming from you. For sales people, it's like signing more deals. For engineering, it's like, I wouldn't not say more code, but code to make sure that the product is running. So for product, it's like how do you kind of improve the metric, and you're doing that courtesy of working with everybody else. So try to be comfortable in the world where you don't know all the details, but you're kind of working with everybody else to kind of move the envelope. And at least for me, it was a little bit difficult coming from an engineering background, because you are by definition working on some of the details all the time, and you ought to be comfortable without knowing all of the details. The second tip that I would give is like try to see if you can navigate between data and intuition whenever possible. Sometimes all of the opinions will be informed by data, meaning you can go back to some of the dashboards and say, hey, something is wrong somewhere. How do I make sure that I fix this in the product? Or in some cases, like you have to go and do the user research and build those intuitions. But the key thing is like how do you choose what to do and what not to do, and how do you kind of dance between these two modes? So the first thing is, again, I would say be very resourceful. Again, you don't have to be from a technical background, but be very comfortable with like data and metrics. Like don't expect a data scientist or a data analyst to kind of be available all the time. Try to see if you can be resourceful whenever you are with respect to data. The second thing I would say is like build a lot of product opinions, like download a lot of apps, play with a lot of products, and just start to form a lot of opinions about, hey, why this is done in this way, why this is not done in that way. Again, the point of it is not to be correct or incorrect. The point of it to be like, how do you kind of build those opinions over time? And try to see if you can be right more often, because sometimes, let's say you're forming these opinions and the entire team is dependent on you, and you are like, your hit rate is 20%. That's still bad for the team, right? So you want to be making sure that you're right at least like 60-70% of the time. And it's not like on day one you have to be right, but over time you want to be making sure that the bets that you're making are informed by the data, informed by the intuitions, but trying to be right 60-70% of the time. And finally, one of the things that I've seen in some of the successful people is like whatever they are trying to do, whether they are communicating a roadmap, communicating a strategy, communicating an insight, simplifying it to a fact that whatever might be the message, try to fit it in a page, try to fit it in a line. I think that is one of the key things that many people don't have, but I think there is a huge power in having that. Again, a simple example of this is like maybe read a release email of a product in a blog, and try to rewrite that if you were the product manager for that. And some of the companies, what they do is they actually write the release management block first before even developing the product. That actually gives a lot of onus on what you should build, what you should not build. And again, one of the things that every product manager is expected to do is like go into a vertical, even though they are not the domain experts of the vertical, but slice and dice the metrics, understand the stakeholders. There are some generic art and science that involves with product management, but I felt like sometimes you get capped being a generalist all the time. So I would recommend maybe going deep into one of the verticals. So for example, if you look at some of the specialities that I've listed here, these are specialities that kind of apply in like different segments of the industries. It could be a consumer technology, it could be a B2B technology, it could be a new healthcare product. But I think again, like understanding how to make sure that you're focusing on growth, how to balance a marketplace, how to focus on operational efficiency, how to build a product that brings in more revenue. These are some of the common patterns that you can learn as product managers, and there is a lot of value in being an expert in those domains. Even though you're changing companies, it is something that I think can help everybody, although all of the skills that we mentioned before still applies to whatever domain you're working on. And finally, one of the things that one of my mentors told me at Microsoft, and I stick to it still today, is like you ought to be building a lot of social capital. I think by definition, you're delivering something that is not directly from you, and you're influencing a bunch of people around you. You are inspiring them, you're motivating them to follow the path that you're drawing. So make sure that you are always building a social capital around you, and so that you can use those social capital sometimes to, it's like a bank account. Sometimes you have to draw certain things, like there might be a day where you have to use that capital. So hey, stop working on everything. Here is what we should do, but FYI, this is needed for the company. So I think constantly keep building that social capital. There are some ways you can do that. First, the priority number one for any product manager is to unblock the team. Make sure that you do it at any cost. So if the team is blocked on something with respect to dependency, if the team is blocked on something with respect to not having the right requirements or right design, try to see if you can prioritize that over something that you are working on. And I think it always pays off. So make sure you unblock the team. The next is there are a lot of bits and pieces in product development that nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to write an FAQ. Nobody wants to clean up that documentation. Nobody wants to go and update the Jira status. Be the person who does that. Again, there is a lot of value in doing that. And I think it adds a lot of things to the social capital. And one of the things that I think I've learned over time is like I was not organized like years back. So I think when a product manager is not organized, I think it reflects a lot on the efficiency of the team. So be the person who comes on time, be the person who sets up the meetings, be the person who sends the meeting notes. I think just these tips and tricks of like being organized helps the team and also helps the team. And finally, if there is one takeaway that I would want to give in social capital is try to be like a living FAQ and a help center for the team. I think that's a good analogy that I was able to come up with over time, which is how do you make sure that you are adding value to the team, not just by work, not just by the definition of the work, but by something outside the work. So I hope these 4 things that we mentioned, which is making sure that you think of your career as like a linear, exponential versus a linear path, and ensuring that you're building a good intuition on data versus good skill set on data versus intuition, and also making sure that you're focusing on a couple of skill sets apart from building a generic product management skill set, and finally being a person who builds the social capital, I think helps somebody think of a product management career as like a very fruitful and rewarding one. Thanks a lot for coming by and appreciate the time. Thank you.